Cast your mind back to 2023 when Ninjago's sequel show was finally getting some information leaked or officially dropped. There were so many different rumors and different ideas of what the sequel of Ninjago could actually hold, and because of that, so many different theories came to be. And as soon as the original name for Dragon's Rising was revealed, which was actually Ninjago United, the theories only began to flood in. And that is what I want to talk about today. If we revisit these old Dragon's Rising theories and see if any of them were even correct. Because the thing is that we were working with basically no information at the time. So I want to know if someone secretly sniped all of this. And of course, above all else, I want to know, once you hear these old theories, did you believe these theories? Do you wish these theories actually came to be? Are there any of these concepts you actually wished actually was the case? I would love to know what you think, because I do find it very interesting. But let me not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about some old Ninjago United theories. The first one is actually based around the reveal of Aaron. Of course, we had a few ideas on what Aaron could be because he was in set leaks, and also he was in some of the initial promotional material that we did get. And we also got some leaks of the minifigure. So Aaron was a fairly known character, but no one actually had an idea on what he necessarily was. A lot of theories and ideas definitely did come from the reveal of just the design of Aaron alone, and the thing is that of course we saw a child variant of him, and then we had an adult version of his minifigure, so people did assume there was going to be a very big time jump in Ninjago United, and I do think that was a very interesting concept overall. But the thing more specifically about Aaron is the fact that a lot of people actually theorized that because he was from the future, his color actually meant a lot more than it necessarily gave off. Of course, a lot of characters are associated with a lot of different colors in Ninjago, and Aaron was using this more orangey yellow color, very similar to Skylar. So the theory came to be that Aaron was a child from the future essentially, and who he was actually the child of both Skylar and Kai. And I'm gonna be honest, I think that is a very hilarious theory in retrospect, because I just don't think they would have done that in the show of Ninjago. But the evidence that people had at the time, I mean, was fairly okay because it is all we had. But a lot of people assumed that Aaron was the son of both Kai and Skylar, and that is why he was using Skylar's colors, because he inherited Skylar's elemental power of Amber. And I think to an extent that is where the Aaron has elemental powers comes from to this very day. I think it just stems from the fact that people automatically assumed that he did have elemental power when he was first revealed. And I do understand, like I said, where it came from, because considering all we had when it came to the character of Aaron was just simply him in his ninja suit, the fact is that a color does tell a lot. Color, like I said, is very much associated with certain characters. If you see green, you assume Lloyd. If you see red, you assume Kai. The thing is that it's very much color coded in Ninjago. So like I say, it does make sense on an overall. But of course, it has been later confirmed that in fact, you don't actually have Aaron as an elemental master, or more specifically the son of Kai or Skylar. The thing is that he's a completely separate character, and he is the child of two completely separate people. So in the end, the theory was completely false. But I do think it's really interesting to note, and like I said, I do think this theory does influence people's thoughts on Aaron to this very day. It's just, as of now, everything that we thought initially about Aaron was completely false. For the second old theory, I've talked about Aaron, so I may as well talk about Sora. The thing is that Sora was also revealed through promotional material. Initially speaking, I believe the first thing we saw of her was that fragmented poster where she was stood behind Lloyd. And of course, a lot of people immediately drove to speculation, because when Sora's design was revealed, it wasn't even associated with the name Sora. People just assumed it was her, but like I said, people did run with the details that we did get. The immediate theory that a lot of people were very much driven to is the fact that she was in fact a formling, and it did come from a lot of different aspects that again really do make a lot of sense when you look at it back in that point. The thing is that we had no idea that Imperium even existed. We had no context on where Sora could be from, because where she was from literally was not even revealed to us. But the thing is that she did have a lot of resemblances, in particular to Akita. Of course, she has a lot of cat details on her armor, of course she has the cat ears on her hood, and she has the markings on her face. It is extremely similar to the Formlings in nature, so a lot of people did come to that conclusion. And again, in very similar vein to the Aaron theory, the thing is that this is literally all we had to go off of. This was the only thing that we actually got when it did come to Sora. And again, it really does make sense because we had no context on Imperium at that point. The thing is that Imperium has very similar markings. Of course, the Imperium arm in this poster is now a major giveaway in retrospect, and not to mention the fact that Sora, just generally speaking, just seems different in nature to what you see with the Formlings. So again, whilst I completely understand it, I do also get it at the exact same time. Honestly, this one was more interesting to me than the Aaron theory because I didn't necessarily believe the Aaron theory even at the time. Of course, I did assume that there was going to be some sort of time jump, but the thing is that I really didn't stand by the fact that people thought that it was going to be way in the distant future. I just simply thought it may have just been another year or two skip. And in retrospect, I was correct, so I'm going to take that and run. But when it did come to Sora, I did fully believe this one, because we had no other context at the time. And I do think it would have been really cool in retrospect if she was in fact a Formling. But in the end, I do actually wildly prefer what we actually got in the end. I do really like her Imperium background, and I really appreciate her backstory at the exact same time. So, on an overall, again, I'm kind of glad this theory never came to be. But I think this is one of the ones in particular where I feel like a lot of people would have rather the Formling background, because it is a very interesting concept and it could have linked back to Akita in some sort of way. So again, I would love to know your opinion on this one, because I do think this is a very interesting topic nonetheless. Not to mention, the concept art was actually very similar to a Formling. The third theory I want to talk about is from one of the very first scenes that we actually got revealed when it did come to Ninjago United, and it was the scene where all the ninja are stood out in the monastery as the merge begins, and it did cause a very interesting theory that actually got a lot of hate. In the scene that got revealed to us, you can see that many of the ninja are actually missing a lot of their defining features. Nia's missing her mole, Jay didn't have his freckles, Wu didn't have the rest of his beard. A lot of the ninja were missing very major aspects of what became quite simply staples in their current design. But the thing is that a lot of people assumed that Dragon's Rising or Ninjago United was reverting the ninja back to more simple designs, and was trying to make them more close to their original designs before the movie even came out. And like I said, this caused a lot of backlash, because a lot of people were complaining that the ninja were going to become too bland. This was very interesting to see at the time, because a lot of people were genuinely very worried that the ninja were going to lose all the aspects that made them themselves. But in reality, the scene itself is quite simply just an animation error, and it just never got fixed before it was revealed. The thing that made this more interesting though in retrospect is the fact that it wasn't necessarily a theory at the time. Because this scene was revealed and we had no further context at the time, people just assumed it was just a fact that the ninja were actually going to be losing their designs in some way. It wasn't until a little later on where it was basically confirmed that they weren't going to lose their designs where it really did become a theory. A lot of people had the idea that in some way, shape or form, the scene actually was meant to be that way and it played into the story somehow. So it was a very interesting time, and like I said, a lot of people were very upset over the fact that it looked like all the ninja were losing their design choices. But the thing is that luckily in retrospect, it was just simply Ninjago being Ninjago, and honestly, I do find it really funny. But the thing is that I do find it interesting, because would there have been people who would have preferred the ninja to have those more bland designs? Because I know a lot of people aren't a fan of certain design details. I do know there's a lot of people who don't particularly like Jay's freckles. So if he did lose it, I wonder if people would have actually been happy with that. But again, that is down to you guys to discuss. The fourth theory that went around a fair bit was actually the case of when we first got the initial teaser that had also the design changes, because not only that, it is where we actually got to see the first instance of the merge. Of course, at the time, we just didn't really know what it was. All we knew that the ninja were panicking and the sky was basically coming in on itself, and we got to see a lot of different things coming through these breaks in the sky. But the thing is that one of the major theories was the fact that the realms were coming together to make one large realm. This was one of the few theories that actually ended up being right from the minimum information that we actually did know, but a lot of people did correctly guess that the merged realms was actually going to be a thing. A lot of people just thought that it was going to be an opening for something new, like a new enemy or a new villain, but overall, it was fairly safe to assume that a lot of people thought that the realms were coming together. And of course, it was confirmed not long after that it was the case, but a lot of people did assume it before we actually did get the answers. So that was actually pretty cool to see. To be honest, because this was one of the correct theories, there's just not really too much to say about it apart from that. It's just the fact that the Ninjago community locked in and realized that the merged realms was occurring. And of course, that is where most of the other theories did come to be. Of course, the Aaron from the future thing. Like, people thought it was a byproduct of the merge. And of course, that's where a lot of people thought Sora was going to come from. I mean, again, technically correct, but just from a different realm. It's just this one idea that the merged realms could be a thing is what caused so many other theories. So it did feel like it was worth a mention nonetheless. And the last theory that came from this time period, and I feel like I almost have to mention it because in retrospect it is extremely funny. And of course, it is the theory that the Time Twins were returning. Of course, not a year goes by anymore where people don't assume the Time Twins are going to return in some way, and it's been basically confirmed that they're not going to return anytime soon. But the thing is that a lot of people did think it was going to happen, and there were some slight reasoning for that to be the case. It came from two things in particular. Two major aspects is what caused people to believe it. For one, again, it ties back to the merge. A lot of people thought that the merge was the byproduct of the Time Twins returning. Of course, you could attribute it to a lot of things, but the Masters of Time being able to do something that would affect time and space like how it did, a lot of people did try to put the pieces together. But the more popular bit of evidence was the fact that we had the reveal of Raptor. A lot of people saw the character of Raptor and immediately assumed it was actually Crux because of the exact same hairstyle. And that for the most part is what the evidence was. People assumed that it was Raptor because he had the haircut, his voice was a similar nature but not identical, and the fact he was covering his eyes with a visor that would perfectly cover up the tattoos that we got to see in Season 7. Those very small coincidences and those instances of just reuse in certain aspects is just quite literally what made people think Crux was around. This also by extension did lead to a theory that Achronix did actually die in the time vortex, and I do think that is a very interesting concept as well. But people thought that the whole thing was going to be that Crux returned, he aligned himself with a new army to take revenge against the ninja for the passing of his twin. And I do think that is very interesting in nature. And of course in the end it wasn't the case because Raptor's a completely separate character and a very controversial one now at best, but the thing is that a lot of people did believe this at the time. Personally speaking, I saw the coincidences and I assumed that there was a very small chance that it could be the case, but on overall I never really took that conclusion from the character of Raptor. The thing is that the hairstyle is general enough and has been used multiple times throughout the course of LEGO in general, so I just never really thought it was complete concrete evidence. But like I said, a lot of people did think it was. But like I said, I also think this comes down to the fact that people just want the return of the Time Twins, and this was somewhat of an indication that it could have been the case. But like I said, in the end, it was incorrect. But in similar vein to the other ones, I would like to know if you do wish it was Crux. But those are the 5 theories I wanted to talk about today. For the most part, they're all false, or they all had some sort of element of truth to them, and they just never really ended up being the case. But I do think they were very interesting for the time. And I will say again that it was with not much evidence whatsoever. Like I said, a lot of the theories were based off of singular images at best. So I do think it was quite creative and quite interesting theories, considering how little we truly knew. I do think it does show the creativity of the Ninjago community, the fact that you can take a singular image and you can base an entire theory just around that, just the color of the outfit, or the markings on the face, or the similarity in the haircut. I do think it's really interesting that you can get an entire theory out of those very few details, and that is why I love Ninjago theories, just taking those very small aspects and constructing them in a very different way to coincide with what we knew before. Personally speaking, I'm kind of glad that most of them didn't come to be. The fact is that I'm glad that Aaron isn't the child of Kai and Skylar, because that would have been a very interesting thing to have actually tackled. I'm kind of glad that Sora is not of the Nether Realm. I'm very glad that she is actually from Imperium, because it did let us explore a different realm instead. I'm glad that the ninja did keep their design details, because I do think that is what makes them the characters that they are. And finally, I'm glad it's not Crux. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of Raptor, I'm just glad they didn't bring Crux back in that way. And not to mention, What do I think of the name Ninjago United? Of course, I've used it throughout the course of today's video, but the thing is that it's a very interesting name, and honestly one that a lot of people use for a very long time. But the thing is that I'm very glad it was replaced with Dragons Rising. I think Dragons Rising's a much better title, but United was very cool nonetheless. But I thought I would also mention that as well, because I'd be curious to know if any of you prefer United to Dragons Rising. But let me know what you think of all of these theories. Let me know if you believed any of these. Let me know if you do wish some of them were the case, because I would love to know what you think of them, because they are interesting, and it's interesting to look at Ninjago at a time before we knew all about Dragons Rising. But that is about it for today, you guys, and thank you very much for watching. Take care. Okay,